Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. With your hosts, Lonnie Lowery.
Remember, Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree held together with scar tissue and bone spurs.
Rob Fortney.
And I'm telling you, the pain that I would suffer was beyond excruciating.
And Phil Stevens.
Just do it, Rob. You'll kill all those nerves.
Thanks for listening.
Welcome, Iron Radio listeners. This is Lonnie Lowery. I'm an exercise physiologist, and I'm a nutritionist, and I'm a former competitive bodybuilder.
My name is Dr. Mike Nelson. I'm the owner of Extreme Human Performance, faculty member at the Carrick Institute, and normally teach also for Broadview, a bunch of other stuff too.
Right on. Phil, we're actually recording this on a different time. Phil was out with, I think, some youth powerlifters at an event, and I was traveling too. It was just sort of a big mess. So we do have a bunch of news backing up on us, though. So Dr. Nelson and I are going to address the news, and then the topic of the day, if you want to stick around for it, let me just tell you what that is now. We're going to talk about fat but still fit, or maybe more importantly, the importance of muscle mass. So some of this stuff is in the news. That's how we sort of came to the topic, but let's start with this.
Strength and muscle sport news.
This first one is just some interesting facts. This is from the Food Insider Journal, I noticed. It says fats are not only essential for good health, they also make key contributions to the physical composition of a vast range of food products. Boy, we saw that in Vegas, right? They're very interested in manipulating fats.
Oh, yeah.
For the physical qualities. The latest issue of Food Insider Journal reveals a few things. One, tropical oils such as coconut and palm are being classified as solid fats rather than oils now. Huh. I hadn't heard that, but interesting. And again, I haven't dug into this any further, but it says in the U.S., most added oils are consumed in salad dressings, mayo, and snack chips. Snack chips doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Do that many people eat mayo? Maybe they do.
I guess. I don't like it, but...
I'm not a huge fan. I guess just on stuff like Big Macs and a lot of fast food sandwiches, I think it's part of the
That's
goop
probably
that
true.
they just... Yeah. Snack chips, I'm sure. And then it says in 2016, 88% of U.S. households reported using butter, 50% using olive oil, 32% other vegetable oils, and 24% specifically canola oil.
I wonder what that would be like several years ago.
Yeah, I actually tell students one of the best things you can do is get the generic-looking, quote-unquote, vegetable oil out of your cupboards and get some olive oil in there, you know, that because it's always that, corn oil, safflower oil. It's just omega-6 heavy, sort of pro-inflammatory stuff, you know, and listeners, if you're not familiar, canola is a close second to olive oil for a source of monounsaturates. I do like some of those phenols and all the other healthy aspects of olive oil, too. So it's one of the best things. And I don't know, Mike, how you do this. Sometimes I'll have extra virgin olive oil, the greener, more pungent stuff, when I want that taste. And then sometimes I'll just get the cheaper olive oil, like at a discount grocer, that's a little bit less aromatic and greenish, you know, and rich, because it actually sometimes I want to fry something that doesn't taste like olives, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I just use coconut oil if I'm doing anything with a little bit more heat, maybe a little butter, sometimes ghee, that kind of thing. There's some debate about, I think, cheaper olive oil. Is it actually olive oil or is it something else that's put in there? And I don't know the answer to that. I haven't had time to look into it all that much, but I have noticed that sometimes there's a pretty big price difference, and maybe there's that much difference in grades of olive oil, but at some point when something gets so cheap, I start to wonder what's going on.
Yeah, I once knew about the processing of olive oil. It's the kind of thing, you know, you forget more than a beginner even knows, I think. And I can't remember specifically. What I seem to remember, though, is that the EVOO is not necessarily that different nutritionally. But yeah, I'd have to look into that too. I'm just going to have to take it for what it is if the label says it's olive oil, you know, and that it's mostly monounsaturated. And, you know, you can test that, folks, if you're interested. stick the olive oil in your fridge. If your fridge is cold enough, it will start to solidify because it's a monounsaturated. If it's really an omega-6 polyunsaturated, like corn oil, safflower, cottonseed oil, even soybean oil, it's not going to start to solidify in a very cold fridge. So
there you go, the poor man's olive oil test.
There you go. Yep, poor man's olive oil chemistry.
There's a good book a long time ago called Fats That Heal and Fats That Kill from Udo Erasmus.
Yes, I remember.
It's an older book now, but that's kind of one of the first times I actually got into all the different processing of the different oils and the history of everything. And if people are looking for more information, I still recommend that book because it's the best one I've ever found of trying to explain the chemistry in a way you can probably understand it and the history of it without going too far over the edge.
Right on. Hey, you know, when you talk about the physical qualities of fats, we have olive oil, of course, and also coconut oil in my cupboards, and our AC broke this summer. And for a period of about a week, the house was probably 80 degrees inside. You know, we had fans going and windows open, and we bought a portable AC unit and all this stuff. But aside from the Lowery family drama, the coconut oil, which is normally solid, right, at room temperature, was liquid. I'm like, hon, look at the coconut oil. It was like a golden, completely, melted. It was like a oil in the jar. And then you kind of get the idea that, again, some of these fats, the monounsaturates or the short chain saturated fats like coconut oil, they're right on the edge of being a fat versus an oil. So you can start to get the idea, the physical qualities.
For manufacturing and a lot of times for food stuff, they'll use coconut oil a lot because, well, now it's a little bit more inexpensive, but it also has a very interesting mouthfeel because of the way it'll kind of melt, right? So if anyone's taken solid coconut oil and just kind of stick it in your mouth, that's enough of a change in temperature that it will kind of melt just from that slight change.
Right. Not unlike chocolate, right? The melting point is right about 37 degrees C. Yeah, body temp.
Yep.
Neat. Okay, geeky stuff this morning. This next one, this is sort of just a brief announcement. I got this through Lab Roots, one of their trending things from Carmen Leach. FDA warns about contaminated supplements. Now, this caught my attention because I thought, well, here we go, right? Because the FDA seems very irritated that they can't regulate dietary supplements more tightly than they do, and a lot of people will argue, it's a power grab for the FDA to want to do that. They've tried to regulate vitamins in the past and all kinds of things and fish oils. And the flip side is you got very conservative groups slamming the FDA for not being harsh enough. So, but anyway, it caught my attention. Here's the news blurb. Dietary supplements are popular in the United States. The NIH has estimated that a third of the U.S. population uses some form of supplement. The FDA is now warning consumers about dietary supplements and drugs made by Pharmatech of Davie, Florida. And I think this has happened before, but bear with me. Apparently, they could be contaminated with the bacterium Burkholderia cepacia. The products included in the FDA's warning include liquid docusate sodium drugs, which are stool softeners. Other products in the warning are dietary supplements such as liquid vitamin D drops and liquid multivitamins for kids. Apparently, the bacterium can cause a range of symptoms from respiratory infection to really no illness at all. Actually, it's not automatically, but I think it's freaking out the FDA, and in the past, even the CDC has gotten involved because there can be outbreaks. You can actually spread this bacteria through direct contact. So when they trace it back to the source, in this case to Pharmatech of Davie, Florida, they sort of freak out and they don't want to have an outbreak, multi-state outbreak sort of thing. But I will point people to, again, it's to LabRoots.com, article written by Carmen Leach. So if you're taking liquid multis from that particular company, Pharmatech, look into it. Look into it more carefully. Next. This next one was sent to me by my wife. Now, this is a little bit beyond the scope of Iron Radio, but Mike, you and I have an interest nootropics and things like that, and dietary supplements and that sort of thing. And I think a lot of people who aren't familiar with the idea of cognition enhancement, I mean, if you're interested in physique enhancement, I think a lot of those same people are interested in self-actualizing in all kinds of ways, becoming the best they can be. And also mentally, JAMA, one of their journals, JAMA Psychiatry, was just promoting a new article, Cognition-Enhancing Drugs, What Are They? Interesting stuff that just came out about nootropics. I'm not going to cover it too much, but apparently there was a chest study, and it revived the debate over cognition-enhancing meds. So, over the years I used to read about them quite a bit. I haven't as much lately. I guess I'm focusing more on the cognition-enhancing nutrients maybe than I am the meds, but there was a bunch out there. Not even sure how to pronounce this drug, but piracetam, I think, was one. There was
piracetam.
Or piracetam, okay.
Yeah, different aniracetams or different types of racetams. That's kind of one of the more popular ones that people have assumed are effective.
How do those work,
Mike?
Some aren't. Like, what's the mechanism by which they enhance cognition? Do you know?
I'm not entirely sure. I mean, from what I read on some of the earlier stuff on piracetam, there's some theories about increasing cell membrane potentials, maybe making it easier to kind of pass signals from one to the next. I'm not really sure of the exact mechanism, to be honest. I've noticed kind of anecdotally with any real nootropics that some people with certain compounds respond pretty good. Other people, didn't really do anything for them either. So there seems to be a lot of individual variability I've noticed more with them than anything else. And usually you give people caffeine and it's a pretty known response, but you can figure out the people who kind of responded and didn't by, maybe looking at their genetics or their history of how much caffeine they use. Or I think with nootropics, we're just trying to figure that out. I know a couple companies are working on different types of tests. You can kind of quantify it yourself. One of them's looking at, is there some type of maybe questionnaire or something that we can give you to try to determine which one you may respond better to? One of the things on my list, which I haven't done yet, is to do more of quantified testing with it. There's a computer program that'll allow you to do different things like a Stroop test and different sort of cognitive type tests.
We used to use the Stroop words tests. Yeah. Listeners, if you're not familiar, like one version, at least one aspect of it is they'll flash the spelled out colors like BLUE, and then sometimes you're supposed to read the word, sometimes you're supposed to say whatever color it is. Like if the text of BLUE is actually green text on the screen, you're supposed to say green. If they're asking for the color, not the word. And then the whole idea is everybody can get this right, but how quickly can you respond, right? If you're being asked what's the color of the text versus what does the word say, what does it read, you get the idea. Yeah, those Stroop words tests, we used to do that with elderly people and look at the cognitive effects of exercise, right, on the elderly. But anyway.
Yeah, and it's one of those tests where you describe it to someone and you go, it's going to be pretty easy. And then you do it as a time thing. You're like, dang it. It's harder than you think it's going to be.
Yeah, they can count the number of mistakes. And the reason I ask about the mechanism, of course, is because there's some of the things that you'll hear, for example, about ginkgo. It might help. My understanding is it's probably going to help the elderly more because part of its mechanism of action is cerebral blood flow. Yeah. And with younger people, that's not an issue, so you don't see some of the memory or cognition tests like those Stroop word tests actually really look like they're that beneficial, at least not a consensus in the literature with the young folks. Whereas with the older people, you're sort of correcting a deficiency, and that's different. But I don't know. And then people, of course, will talk about like omega-3 fats and fish is brain food and that sort of thing. Like I said, I haven't looked at this stuff for quite a long time. It is interesting, though, that a lot of the anti-inflammatory and generally physically healthy supplements might also help with, your brain, your memory, and your thinking and whatnot.
Yeah, it's definitely an area that's growing pretty fast. I mean, I think now it's becoming almost, I don't want to say quite mainstream, but definitely a lot more mainstream than even a couple of years ago. And I mean, even just some of the students I talk to, it's relatively common. Even different drugs are used for that now and are pretty easy to get, which, I don't know, that really kind of freaks me out.
Yeah.
He's using Adderall now, and I'm like, oh, geez.
Oh, yeah. We used to call that what it is, back when I was little, like, in the 70s or whatever. I mean, you could say Adderall and it sounds sort of benign, but,
Right.
amphetamine sounds a little bit scarier, but let's call it kind of what it is here.
That's what it is.
Speed. Yeah, and like you said, I mean, caffeine and that sort of stuff. I want to start looking into a few online tests for cognition and whatnot, too, because there's some neat things that I'm playing with in that regard as far as research goes. So... Anyway, yeah, I just thought I would give everybody a shot. If you're interested in nootropics, things that enhance memory, focus, concentration, just thinking, arguably even intelligence, depending on how you define that, yeah, JAMA Psychiatry. It's spanking new stuff here that they're promoting, I think, on Twitter and a couple other sources. But it's because of a new chest study. And again, it revives the debate over some of these cognition-enhancing drugs by Jeff Lyon, published in Journal of American Medical Association online, August 16th. So
that's pretty cool to see that actually in JAMA, actually.
Yeah. And they're addressing, I think, the debate over it. Like, how possible is it to actually take a pill and become smarter? Wow. I mean, that's really putting it in lay terms, I guess. But
yeah.
Okay. Our last little tidbit of news is going to set up our topic of the day. This is also from LabRoots. By Xuan Pham, or I don't know how you would pronounce Xuan. Jean Pham. Anyway,
sounds good to me.
Fat but fit, still at risk for heart disease is what it's called. And again, this is going to set up our topic about body fatness versus muscle mass. Can you be fat but fit? Because I can tell you, playing around on Instagram lately, I see quite a few powerlifters posting pictures of themselves, and they meet most definitions of obese, right? Now, they carry a ton of muscle mass, too, though, and again, it made me think of that game Phil plays with his wife and his friends, fat or powerlifter,
Yeah.
But anyway, according to a new study, being quote-unquote fat but fit is still far from reality. In fact, those who are overweight or obese risk up to 28% increase in coronary heart disease risk. In recent years, the term fat but fit has been adopted by the general public to describe those who seem metabolically healthy despite carrying extra weight. And when they say metabolically healthy, they're talking about things like your serum triglycerides, right, your blood fats, low HDL, or the high density low lipoprotein cholesterol, the good cholesterol, high blood pressure, having to use diabetes meds, high waist circumference. There's a lot of things that are sort of tied into metabolism quite strongly. It says, studies have found evidence to the contrary of this whole fat but fit thing that a lot of people in the Gen Pop are saying. In the current study, led by researchers from Imperial College of London, there was confirmation that fat but fit may be a myth. They followed 17,640 people over 12 years. Now, when I hear that, a lot of people might say, ooh, wow, large subject size. Usually that to me, it's like, here comes the correlational data, right? Like, they're going to be trying to study. Yeah. They're just making observations. They're not directly intervening. It's probably not causal. And indeed, they used body mass index as their marker of obesity. Now, in the Gen Pop, it's pretty fair if you have a very high weight for height, right, and your BMI is over 30. It's almost certainly not because you're jacked with lots of muscle mass, right?
Yeah.
I mean, anybody on the Mr. Olympia stage, I'm sure their body mass indexes hover over 30. And,
way over.
Yeah, and they have almost no body fat, but of course, there's drugs involved at that stage. And honestly, even in collegiate sport or in natural bodybuilding and that sort of stuff where the people are really quite lean when they compete, they might carry some extra body fat in the off season, but I myself had a body mass index of 30, 31 for a long time. And, that's a mix of fat and lean, but I was never obese from a purely adipose tissue perspective. I think I might have been 20% fat at my fattest, in the off-season kind of thing, and then whittle it down to like 4% to compete or something, 4 or 5%. But in any case, they used BMI as a marker of obesity. The team found that high body mass index, again, weight for height, was a risk factor for heart disease, irrespective of the person's metabolic health. Those who met the definition of fat but fit had a 28% increase in heart disease risk as compared with those with lower body mass index. Now, the end of this article, Mr. or Mrs. Pham here, the author, did point out normal body mass index is not enough, of course, to protect against heart disease. Normal weight people who were metabolically unhealthy were also very likely to develop heart disease in this study. They also had higher risk. And we've all seen that kind of person, right? The person who, they're not hugely obese, but they're so sedentary. They lack muscle tone so badly, like you look like you could plunge your finger up to your second knuckle, into their thigh, right into their or their shoulder or their arm. That's not cool. Like, that's probably not good either. And they may have a lot of these problems, right? High blood sugar, high blood triglycerides, fatty liver, low HDL, whatever. So fat but fit, new study suggesting that that's probably not accurate. Again, if you're willing to overlook BMI as your criterion for who's fat. So
yeah, that's been, Dr. Stephen Blair, that's been his kind of argument for going on decades now too. So
yeah. Here's a quote. To put it bluntly, there is no such thing as being healthy obese, according to Camille Lasalle, an epidemiologist at the university that I was mentioning, who led the study.
But they're also conflicting obese with, like you said, BMI and people who have a lot of muscle too. So I think that's where it gets messy, right? Because there's also a subdivision where you could say that some people may be obese, but they're not really showing any metabolic disorders. And in that group, usually if you follow them long enough, then they tend to start showing metabolic issues later. And just so happen that you saw them sort of early in the process.
Yeah, it's a hopeless confusion, I think, between like clinical medicine, which is like blood values, urine, blood, etc., and structural pathologies, like you're actually carrying all this weight, or your heart is stretched out because of your high blood pressure for many years, or kidney problems, etc. So anyway, you're right. It's a can of worms. It's hard to tease apart, and so that's what we're going to talk about after the break. We're going to talk about obesity, carrying extra body fat, but really with a focus on muscle mass, right? Because in our listenership, certainly you're carrying dozens, potentially, of extra kilos of body weight around, but it's actually muscle mass. So how important is muscle mass to health and longevity and whatnot? So we're going to address that when we get back. Hey listeners, this is Dr. Lonnie Lowery. If you've ever had anyone critique you on your protein intake as part of your weightlifting lifestyle, oh, you poor meathead, all that extra protein is going to rot your kidneys or weaken your bones or dehydrate you or give you gout or who knows what. There is a book available. You could simply Google CRC Press and Lowery. And what I've done is reach out to experts all over the world and create a book, a single compendium that you can hold up and say, this is why I consume extra protein. This can be very valuable when you're being quote-unquote educated by various professionals on the topic. There's an enormous amount of literature in this book on the safety, the effectiveness, how protein works in cells, the history of protein and weight trainers, much more. So again, please check out CRC Press and Protein and Lowery. You can just Google that. And I do, full disclosure, I do make a small single-digit royalty on the book.
But that's not why I did it. I did it so we can all have something, our particular population, to both defend what we do and to inform our nutrition and our eating. Thanks. Iron Radio is, of course, primarily a podcast. But over the years, there have been technical glitches calling for backup streaming and listeners who wanted the convenience of other sources of audio content. Toward this end, Iron Radio is now simulcast and backed up on YouTube. If needed, please search Lawnman07 or Iron Radio from within YouTube. There's not much video, but if you like to listen through YouTube on a Roku or other living room device, there you go.
Like your weekly fix of Iron Radio? In addition to being a popular institute on iTunes, we are also on email. Simply go to www.ironradio.org and sign up for the voluntary email. You'll get a once per week email, no more. That's little more than the show notes and a link to the audio. So go for it.
All right, everyone, we're back. It's Lonnie and Mike, and we are talking about muscle mass. How important is muscle mass? Of course, just before the break, we were touching on a new study that was sort of debunking this idea of being fat but fit that the general population likes to sort of toss around. Now, the truth is, though, powerlifters in our sort of subgenre, they can carry quite a bit of extra body fat, but they also have a ton of muscle mass. I mean, undeniably, high-end powerlifters have a ton of muscle mass. So how important is it to have extra muscle mass? I'm going to run down some facts, and then I'll toss around some questions with Dr. Nelson. First, muscle mass is important to your health, right? Your muscle tissue is sort of a reservoir for amino acids. Your body has inter-organ exchange of amino acids, and your body needs amino acids to build all kinds of proteins, from the enzymes that run your metabolic pathways, to hormones and your immune function, like immunoglobulins and things like that. So the difference, though, with muscle tissue is you're kind of using that, right? It's a reservoir of amino acids and proteins that your body can tap, but it's not the same thing as like muscle glycogen, like carbohydrate stores. It's not the same thing as body fat. It's again, you're using those muscles. It's like this reservoir, but it's a functional reservoir. Another example might be that it's been estimated, I've seen this in multiple books and papers, but something like 70% of the carbohydrates you eat and that blood glucose should end up in muscle tissue as glycogen. It's a healthy recipient of carbohydrates, that sort of stuff. So in a clinical setting, once your muscle mass gets so low because you've got some type of cachectic disease, right, muscle loss type of disease or something, people die. Right, you need a certain amount of muscle tissue to be functional, activities of daily living, but even metabolically, it's very important. It's not just for show. Now, obviously, there are the functional aspects. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger used to say it's an amazing experience to walk around being bigger and stronger than everyone else, and I think that's our initial draw, right? Powerlifting, bodybuilding. It's fun to be almost a superhero among the general populace. And I would venture to say, right, I think we can safely say very few of our listeners have sarcopenic obesity, right? It's sort of the ultimate, scary thing to me, which is muscle wasting, like with age or what have you. Your muscles are shrunken down and you're still obese. So basically you're walking around, your body composition is almost entirely fat. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but, way heavy on the fat, very, very little muscle. And that's got to be different from the guys who, yes, they have big bellies. They got power bellies. They're carrying a lot of fat. They might be 25% fat, even 30% fat, but they have huge deltoids and pecs and quads and glutes and lats. And so what are your thoughts on that, Mike? The importance of muscle mass. Do you think the powerlifters or the off-season bodybuilders that listen to the show, are they at any kind of the same risk that some of the, Midwestern American who's I was just down in Southern Ohio. There was so much morbid obesity, right? Intractable obesity. People, their abdominal wall just looks like it had given way. Guts hanging to their knees. 400-pound, huge persons, and probably not a lot of muscle mass, at least on average. But so maybe you could offer some thoughts, some comparisons about, the power lifter or the off-seasoned bodybuilder who's carrying a lot of fat, but also has that important muscle mass.
Yeah, I mean, just based on what you said, we know that while fat is extremely metabolically active from more of I'd say a cellular communication standpoint, it doesn't really serve much of how I think of maybe performance-based. I mean, unless you're, getting like super, super lean and things of that nature. So my viewpoint is looking at metabolic health, primarily through metabolic flexibility. And then over the course of your life, what are sort of the main markers for mortality? Right. So if we look at it and say, okay, we're going to look at mortality because it's a hard endpoint, which is kind of cruel because at the end of the time, you're either dead or alive. It's pretty easy to determine that. And the top ones for that are VO2 max, so kind of aerobic capacity, classic kind of quote unquote endurance type stuff. Grip strength is definitely up there, and usually leg strength. A lot of times the sit to standing and maybe walk type test in elderly. What's interesting to me is that those are all basically performance metrics. Body composition doesn't really play into that as far as I know. I'm sure at some point it does, but usually what you see is that body composition results in a detriment in terms of those performance indicators. Right, so if you take a very large mammal wandering around the state fair somewhere and have them do any type of those performance tests, odds are they're probably not going to do really well. Now you compare that to bodybuilder or powerlifter, they're probably going to do pretty well. And I think you'd be surprised even on like a VO2 max how well some of those people may do. And again, there's definitely exceptions to that. There's a lot of powerlifters that have probably a horrible VO2 max, but if you look at bodybuilding classically, you do a fair amount of cardio and that type of thing too. So you're not really completely pushed to one end of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. And, muscle, as you mentioned, is a good place to dispose of fat and carbohydrate. Yeah. So it's kind of metabolic flexibility. How well can you use carbs? How well can you use fat? And we know based on that, just viewing through the lens of metabolism, that as you start losing that, your dramatic risk of type 2 diabetes comes up, right? So you start losing the ability to fully use carbs. And then what happens, your body puts out more insulin that says, hey, I can figure out this problem. I'll just jack out more insulin. And what happens then is as insulin stays higher and higher and higher, starts impairing your body's ability to use fat as a fuel. So you can think of insulin as like the fuel selector switch, which I think I stole that from Jeff Volek sometime. Mm-hmm. And the higher the insulin pushes you to use carbs, lower insulin pushes you to use fat. If your insulin levels can't ever really come down because you've got issues with carbohydrate metabolism, like a type 2 diabetic, then you actually start losing the capacity to use fat as a fuel also. So in essence, get squished from both ends of the spectrum. And you're actually, again, losing capacity. So I tend to think of it as a framework of what are the markers for mortality. And the ones that we know of now appear to be very much on the performance-based end of the spectrum. So if you're doing better on that performance end, you're probably going to be doing better overall. And we know that muscle is directly related to that and also related to different fuel usage for metabolism.
Right. I like what you said about it's not just carbohydrates. And everyone, it depends on how much muscle mass you carry, but muscle tissue, let's say that an average or to a good-sized guy can carry 400 or 500 grams of glycogen in muscle tissue or muscle and liver maybe combined. But, and then many dozens of grams of fat, 300 or 400 grams of fat, depending, again, little oil droplets within muscle. Fat isn't only stored in fat cells, in adipocytes, so having that place to put it in a healthy way can be good,
it can be good. I actually tried to tease that apart once in the lab. We took some bodybuilders. We took guys who were reasonably lean. They were like in the teens in percent body fat, like let's say 15% body fat. So reasonably lean, had a lot of muscle mass. They had high body mass index, and we did a brutal workout with negatives, right? Eccentric exercise, made them very sore, and we tried to hamper their muscles' ability to take up and store the glycogen, and we gave them a glucose tolerance test, and their blood sugars did run higher, and their insulin was a little higher too, because again, the muscle was temporarily resistant. And you could find work from other people like that too. Mike Sherman, Kevin Yaroshevsky. There's been people. Delaguila did some biopsy work with some of the aspects of the insulin pathways within muscle tissue. But other people have pretty well documented that sore muscles don't take up carbohydrates quite as well. Now, I don't want people not to lift, not to do negatives, and because it's going to make my blood sugar go up and my insulin go up, and Dr. Nelson just said too much insulin all the time is bad. This is a very temporary kind of thing. Generally, people who lift weights, when you're not sore, you have actually better glucose tolerance, right? You're actually better insulin sensitivity. You have more muscle tissue, more place to put the glycogen, stuff like that. But we were trying to tease apart where it goes, right? I think it's one of those things when you start studying metabolism and you're interested in bodybuilding or powerlifting, like, how do you send nutrients to the right compartment? That whole like nutrient partitioning idea. I want to send carbohydrates into my muscles. I don't want, I'm so fat and I have so little muscle tissue that what does my body do with those carbohydrates? Because I literally don't have the kilos of muscle mass to deposit, the blood glucose into there. So what happens? Anyway, so yeah, you start to look at the metabolic important. What about your clients, Mike? So when people come to you, and I don't know what they're interested in or how you address it, but do you have a personal bias, or do you see a lean in what they're interested in, like reducing fat versus adding muscle versus just performance?
Yeah, so I would say in general, most of the people I work with, even if they come to me for pure body composition, I'm still always looking at their performance, even if it's just performance in the gym or whatever their sport is, because that's something that you can measure, a lot of times even session to session, depending on what, kind of setup you're looking at. And it's really hard for someone to stay motivated if their performance in the gym is always trending down, because that's the thing they see kind of day in and day out. And going back to the capacity, overall, I kind of want them to be in more of an expansion instead of a contraction. So I want them to be able to do more things. It's also a marker for, am I increasing strength? Maybe muscle mass, so like it's kind of messy. It's really hard to see body composition changes day to day, even sometimes week to week.
Oh, yeah.
So I find it from a motivational standpoint, focusing more on performance and then obviously looking at nutrition and diet and things of that nature. If you have someone who's doing a physique competition towards the end, their performance is going to degrade. But even in that case, you want to keep their performance pretty good as long as you possibly can. If they've got, something of a baseline status of a bod pod or even a weight or picture or something like that, you can get a rough idea of, where they're at. And I've had this a few times. Usually it's sadly more with women who, body composition's not horrible, but they want to improve it. Their performance, not so good, because they've gone through these cycles where their performance has eroded. Just trying to be weight stable. They're at 1,200 calories or something super low. With them, I'm going to slowly try to increase more calories, probably more protein, and try to get their performance to come back up. I usually look at their stress level, resting heart rate variability. Normally that's pretty skewed off. So I don't really want to be super aggressive with them, because it's just not going to end well. What are you going to do? Like eat 800 calories the rest of your life? You may lose a few pounds, but at some point you're going to plateau. And now where you plateau is a place where it's completely, utterly unsustainable. You probably are going to break down at some point. It's hard to get more micronutrition in. You're not happy because your performance is not very good. You go to the gym and everyone else beats you all the time. You haven't got a PR in like 3 years. It's just not a fun place to be, even just from a psychological standpoint. So trying to do the opposite of that, and I've told people that, hey, we're gonna have to take a period of time. We're gonna have to increase your calories back up. We're gonna increase your performance. We're gonna try to normalize your stress. The reality is you may gain a few pounds at that point. I'm not going to let you go anything that's going to be extremely excessive, but you're probably not going to get significantly leaner at that point. There are exceptions. Some people, you just start feeding them a little bit more and they start, spontaneously moving around and feel better and everything kind of normalizes pretty fast. But at other times, it's a little bit more of a longer process. I know Lane Norton's talked a lot about reverse dieting and things of that nature, but I want to see him go back up to at least somewhat of a reasonable level. And I really want to see their stress kind of normalize. Because if I just add a whole bunch more stress to them, at some point all the wheels are going to come off and they're going to be pretty rightfully upset.
Yeah. Yeah, the refeeds after diets, that concept has been around for quite a while. And it's good that it gets attention. Yeah, I can't even work with, especially like female fitness competitors and stuff. You're going to make them lean enough, they're going to lose their period. And so we have to talk about bringing that back, like you were saying, normalizing things, slowly refeeding, getting the stress somewhat more normal. And
I have a little rule with HRV that, and even now, I haven't worked with a female physique client for a while. I've got another one coming up that'll start on Monday, and I've worked with her in the past, so that's pretty easy. But I've kind of a little unwritten rule that they have to measure their HRV, and it has to be normal for at least 3 months before they can even talk about doing another show. Because there's this thing where, and I get it, that you put all this time and effort into it, and you do the show, and on the one hand, that all that accumulated stress didn't just dissolve overnight. But there's, I think, a human tendency to think that it did, because the marker in your head was the show, right? So you figure, all my stress is gone, everything will be great. And as you know, it's not.
Right, yeah.
It's not, sometimes for weeks to sometimes months. So I found by having that actual data to show, okay, here's where you were 6 months out, here's where you were 3 months, here's where you were the day of the show. Now we need to kind of get back in that general direction again, because if we just start adding more stress to your body all of a sudden again just 2 months from now, and that hasn't even normalized, wow, now you're digging this massive ditch that's going to be pretty hard to get out of. And what I've noticed with a few competitors now is that they can kind of get away with it for like the first couple shows, and they can do some pretty horrendous stuff to their body, and they kind of generally bounce back. And then the story is almost like verbatim, like all the same. They did the same kind of silly stuff, and all of a sudden their body just didn't respond. It's almost like you cross that sort of inflection point where your body's like, oh no, there's no more of this, right? You're not getting the same nice response you got before, and it's going to be quite a while to get it sorted out.
Right. And, back to even the body composition kind of aspect of this, that's one of the things that I started getting really fed up with competing was they wanted you to look so emaciated, that I was trading hard-won muscle mass, right? So when you were talking about being bummed out in the gym, like clients or even yourself not getting a PR in 3 years and feeling depressed, I've never been that oriented, as far as performance. From the bodybuilding side, it was always about how much muscle mass could I carry. And I value muscle mass even more than leanness. Like being really, really ripped is fun. I would lie if I didn't say that wasn't fun. You feel fantastic. It's so dramatic. But when the rubber hits the road, maybe I even have a bit of body image distortion with this, but I cannot abide losing muscle tissue. I'm not that big of a person. I'm not a 280-pound dude. I can't afford just to throw away 5 pounds of muscle to get that last pound or couple pounds of fat off me, for each pound of fat. And it was contrary to bodybuilding. So just like you're talking about expansion, to me, bodybuilding
or strength gain. These are about gains, not about sacrificing added mass, like muscle mass, in the name of being lean. So, I don't know. It just comes down to like a body composition kind of argument and what you value, I suppose. All right, so one last question. We're talking about the importance of muscle mass and, not wanting to lose it even while dieting to make a weight class or compete in bodybuilding or what have you. But do you see something more dangerous with weight cycling, like a bodybuilder or a physique competitor might do, versus, let's say, a power lifter who carries a ton of muscle mass, keeps that muscle mass all the time, but stays fatter than the competitive bodybuilder? Is weight cycling different from just weight steadiness? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Something I've kind of gone back and forth on over the years. I would say like 10 years ago, if you asked me, I would say, oh, weight cycling, oh, not so good. And, kind of look at some of the literature on yo-yo dieting and things of that nature. I've kind of changed my mind over the years. And I think, a lot of it depends upon how it's done, of course. There's, good ways of doing it and there's bad ways of doing it. But I think from the psychology standpoint, and you've talked about this in the past, of being able to control your weight, I find for long-term changes that's by far probably the number one thing, right? So if I work with a client who's never been, where they want to be for leanness, there's always this little voice that kind of lives in the back of their head that since they haven't done it, they kind of unconsciously a lot of times assume that they can't do it. But if they've gotten there a couple times, competitors are pretty good at doing that because that's what they do, then you feel more safe about it because you have control over it. You know what to do, so for right now, I'm working on getting leaner. So I'm, down in terms of body weight to the lowest I've been since, I don't know, probably graduated college maybe. But I knew kind of what to do and didn't do it before because I had a bunch of other stuff going on. But I wasn't hyper worried about it because I knew what I needed to do.
Oh, yeah.
I think if I didn't have that skill set, now I feel like, oh my God, I'm kind of out of control. I don't know what to do to get back to there, or if I wanted to add, 10 pounds or whatever, it's going to take a while, but I know what I need to do. So I think knowing that is super helpful.
It is. I agree.
And I think that from a metabolic standpoint, you could argue that having periods of lower calories and having periods of higher calories, I think is good as long as your body can adequately handle them, right? So you mentioned if we give someone, I've jokingly recall this, the 2 Pop-Tart test. So if I give someone 2 Pop-Tarts for breakfast and they feel like they're going to crawl in a hole and take a nap a half hour later, yeah, it's not the best response that I would want, right? It's kind of like the poor man's oral glucose tolerance test.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can handle that and you can dispose of that glucose and you're doing okay, that's a positive. If you can go for 19 to 24 hours fasting and not feel like you're going to gnaw your arm off or destroy a Chinese buffet, that's probably going to be a more beneficial thing. Now, people get lost when they go, oh my God, you're telling people to eat Pop-Tarts, then you're telling them not to eat. It's like, no, those are just the extreme ends of the spectrum to see
more acute.
if you can handle it.
Yeah.
Right, for very acute periods of time.
Right.
So I think you can expand that concept into, having periods like what's classically done in sports of more of an off season, and you've got, your kind of on season, so to speak. And I think as long as you're doing it in an intelligent way, I think it's probably going to be okay. Last comment is, I see some power lifters, and I get it, that if you're in the super heavyweight and there's no other weight class above you, yeah, if your goal is to move the biggest load you possibly can, yeah, there may be some benefits to staying on the heavier side. But there's been examples, so like Zavickas for strongman actually came down quite a bit in body weight. Looks quite a bit leaner. Unfortunately, he had some issues, so his last competition wasn't so good. But it'll be interesting to see, even in a sport like that, where being bigger is, you could argue, a pretty big advantage with all the implements and stuff you're using.
Yeah.
Does he do just as well? How much does he lose? You could argue that as he's getting older, he's not super old by any means, but in terms of sport, he's definitely on the older side. Maybe that was probably the best thing he could do for just his pure metabolic health, too.
Yeah, having tons and tons of adipose tissue, there's no doubt that's going to cause inflammatory derangements, in your metabolism. It's better just, if you can get rid of it. I know what you're saying. He has specific challenges with those ridiculous tasks that they have to perform compared to the average person. When it comes to yo-yo, like you, I have changed a little bit. I would have said, no, you do a lot of really bad things with yo-yo dieting. You can sort of permanently wake up and differentiate pre-adipocytes. You end up with more fully functioning, fully storing fat cells if you keep doing this. But if you look at the Office of Dietary Supplements, actually, ODS.gov, they have some interesting comments on there, and I haven't looked at it in a while, but that weight cycling isn't as bad as we once thought. And I think it's a population specificity issue, right? If you're talking about the frustrated, middle-aged person who's starving themselves, and they starve themselves down to a lower body weight, artificially, temporarily depressed body weight and body fatness, and then they gain it all back at Krispy Kreme. And and then they do it again, and then they do it again. Over time, the early data would say that you lose less body weight and body fat each part of this yo-yo cycle, and you gain back even more. So you might lose 10 pounds the first time and gain back 12. You lose 8 pounds the second cycle, you gain back 15. And then the third time you only lose 4 pounds and you gain back 20. And over time, it's very depressing to look at that stuff, but I think it's also important to note, that that kind of ignorant yo-yo dieting that you'll sometimes see studies about in the general population, that's not the same thing that physique athletes are doing to themselves. It's more of a 15 or 20 week controlled process. They lose the body fat. If they're intelligent, they follow a refeed, to get back up to a training intake, calorie intake, that kind of thing. So I don't think it actually applies as much. So I'm sure there are people in the bodybuilding or the figure fitness world who they diet badly, they refeed badly, and they end up screwing themselves up pretty good. So like you were saying, I think a lot of this is a population specificity thing, how you do it. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it necessarily, but if that's the off-season, on-season thing, and we've talked about this for years on this show, but you can't just try to stay lean all the time and make muscular gains as a bodybuilder. Muscle mass is important. Muscle mass is the name of the game, and unfortunately, in some of these natural competitions, I almost see that fall away, where just getting rid of body fat, these guys it's more like body wasting than it is bodybuilding.
That's what they're judged on, too. That's who is the most lean on stage, and that's a lot of times what the main criteria is, too.
Yeah. Especially, in the natural shows, you can only be so big, I mean, the truth is, and I might get some crap for this, I've said this in the past, but at 5'10", like an average-sized guy, about 200 pounds in relative shape. That's really big. And if
for a natural guy, that's way bigger than most people realize.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you're walking around in the off season at like 220, 230. You compete at like 190. I really think that's the upper echelons of what you can do naturally, or quite close. But so,
and last comment too about overfeeding. There's some very classic studies on this. If you look at the lean body mass that's gained from that, it can be 30 and sometimes as high as 50%. Now, this is not for, this is for 8, 12, sometimes 16 weeks. So this is not over the course of a year. And obviously, glycogen and all that other stuff is kind of lumped in with lean body mass because it's not fat. Mm-hmm. But the first couple of times I saw that, I was kind of like, holy crap. And these are not necessarily people that were exercising either, So I think, like you said, in the off season, you can make an argument that, just increasing calories for the purpose of, gaining, more mass, and even trying to divert more of that towards lean mass is, definitely going to be in your advantage.
Yeah.
And, you've seen people who've done, too many shows and have never really had an off season, they kind of look the same.
They do, year after year.
Some pretty intelligent natural bodybuilder competitors now that'll take sometimes 2 to 3 years as their off season, just because they're, getting closer to their genetic potential, and they know that it's going to take that long a time, to add any significant amount of lean body mass and to keep it, and then, kind of go back down on the other end.
Yeah, they're natural. I mean, you can't just, like Arnold used to say, you need some deltoids, just, slap them on like it's clay. Well, if you're not taking Anadrol, that's harder to do. It takes a while, But no, it's a good point, and I think I've written about that before. That you're right. Even without a weight training stimulus, when you kick up the calories and gain weight, it's not 100% fat gain, right? It's interesting stuff. So just hormones and substrates and all that sort of stuff. So
I've often thought for people that are quote unquote hard gainers, you see this time and time again, is that they just don't eat enough, and some of those people, you may be pushing 3,500, 4,000, maybe 5,000 calories a day for a while. But I remember John Berardi saying years ago, he's like, at some point you will out-eat your metabolism. It's not going to keep increasing exponentially forever. Yeah. So.
The way I've always said, you can only defy the laws of physics for so long, right? Or you can't defy the laws of physics, right? This is an energy balance issue, and you can tilt the scale at some point, for sure. Yeah. Okay, well, good stuff. So there's some thoughts for everyone. How important is muscle mass relative to body fatness? I might actually ask Ron Mendel. Mike, you know Ron. He has some great stats. He actually teaches a course on the social implications of obesity and the different kinds of obesity, and he's got great stats on for example, how much more dangerous it is for your health to be sedentary than it's even more of an issue. Sedentaryism itself becomes a huge problem, I guess what I'm saying, instead of just body fatness. He has great data, and it really harkens back to this: can you be fat and fit? And again, if the fatness is sort of general pop fatness, I think he would say no, there is no such thing as fat but healthy, right, in the general population. So he's got some interesting stuff. Maybe I'll have him on. It'd be a fun conversation.
Yeah, because that gets into the whole subtopic of just general movement, right? And you can look at the British, I think it was postal worker study, and there's a bunch of very classic studies that, compared people who had to move for a living to people when they were just starting to do kind of quote-unquote knowledge-based, desk work, and how far we've come in just the other direction of just not moving from there, which is really scary in its own way.
Oh, right. I mean, when you think about muscle tissue, just contracting a muscle causes, an uptake of blood glucose, stuff like that, because the glucose transporter is activating and all that. Yeah. Big deal.
That was one of the studies I did at the U of M. They had a seated versus standing desk, and they had 24/7 glucose monitors on people. The short version of it is that people who stood up actually had better glucose management, and they spontaneously actually moved around more because they were already standing.
Interesting.
So that's pretty interesting.
Actually, one last tidbit, since this is all related, but this fall, the new study arc that I'm undertaking is I'm actually looking at diet records and dietary components, specifically stimulant things, or at least mostly, coffee, tea, things like that, and how much they affect your movement patterns.
Yeah.
So
super interesting.
Yeah, it'll be fun to see, like, do people who eat more carbs, do they move more or less? Or number of cups of coffee a day, does that affect how many steps you take? So it'll be neat to see what does drive that, because like you said, there's so little demand in many jobs for muscular activity. Yeah. Is there something that we can eat to influence that as well? So.
Yeah, just ask anyone who took the old ECA stack.
Oh, damn right. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, crushes your appetite, and you just feel like you just want to run around everywhere.
Right. That'll adjust your energy balance.
Yep.
All right, folks, we're out of time, so we'll catch you next time.
Yep. See you.
Hey listeners, have you seen the store at IronRadio.org? There are 3 halls in the store, one for Phil, one for Fortress, and one for myself, Dr. Lowery, and they're thematic. So you can go into our Halls of Iron store and choose based on your goal. If you need something to learn or read or something nutritional, you can look in my store, Lonnie's store. If you want something about injury prevention or competition, then take a look at Phil's Hall of Iron. And if you want something about motivation or daily training, Fortress's Hall has what you're looking for. There are some fun, heroic descriptors as you browse through the store, so we try to make it a little more fun than the average boring online store. And whether you're a novice lifter or someone more experienced, you can take heart that you're not wasting your time. The things that we put in each Hall of Iron are actually based on our own recommendations. Protein powders that we know to be good, knee sleeves, wraps of some kind, things that Fortress uses in his own training. The stuff you see, you know is good. This way you don't waste time. So check out the Iron Radio store at ironradio.org and let us know what you think on the forums, and certainly you can request products and we will screen them before they go in. So thanks for listening. Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.